nobody ever came to these sites with a clear idea of what they were searching for.
Nobody ever went looking for Cleopatra expecting fear. For over 2,000 years, we've been told the same story. The most beautiful woman in history. A queen so captivating, she bent Rome to her will. A living goddess whose face launched empires into chaos. But what if that story is completely wrong? What if Cleopatra's greatest battle wasn't against Julius Caesar or Mark Antony, but against her own DNA? What if the woman history crowned as a beauty icon was actually fighting a biological curse so severe it should have destroyed her before she ever reached the throne? Recent forensic analysis, genetic research, and archaeological discoveries are forcing historians into an uncomfortable corner, because when scientists followed the bloodline of the last pharaoh, they didn't find elegance or perfection. They found deformities, disorders, and signs of a dynasty quietly collapsing in on itself. And here's the unsettling part. The clues were never hidden. They've been sitting in plain sight for centuries, buried in family trees, forgotten tombs, and bones no one bothered to question until now. Deep beneath the sands of Egypt, a tunnel stretches nearly a mile through solid bedrock. It shouldn't exist. It doesn't make sense, and yet it leads straight toward the sea, as if someone wanted to disappear forever. Nearby, the dead were buried with gold tongues placed in their mouths, ritual tools meant to speak to the gods themselves. This isn't just a hunt for a lost tomb. It's a reconstruction of a body, a mind, and a woman who may have survived one of the most genetically dangerous bloodlines in human history. Because if the science is right, Cleopatra wasn't a miracle of beauty. She was a miracle of survival, and the truth waiting underground might be far more terrifying than the legend we fell in love with. For most historians, Cleopatra's story ends in a shrug. They'll tell you her body is gone, swallowed by time, buried somewhere beneath modern Alexandria. Earthquakes shattered the coastline. The sea rose. The streets were rebuilt again and again. According to the textbooks, whatever tomb she had was erased forever. But that explanation has always been a little too convenient, because for the last 20 years, one woman refused to accept that answer. Not a career Egyptologist, not a museum insider, but a criminal defense lawyer from the Dominican Republic named Kathleen Martinez. And she didn't approach Cleopatra like a legend. She approached her like a missing person. Martinez treated Cleopatra's disappearance the same way she would a cold case. She studied motives, patterns, psychology, and one thing immediately stood out. Cleopatra didn't just die, she vanished. There was no body, no confirmed tomb, no public burial Rome could point to as proof of victory. And that silence was suspicious. If Cleopatra feared anything, it wasn't death, it was humiliation. Being dragged through Rome in chains, paraded as a trophy, reduced from queen to warning. That was the fate she was desperate to avoid. So Martinez asked a question no one else was asking. If Cleopatra wanted to disappear completely, where would she hide? While scholars kept searching under Alexandria, Martinez looked west, 30 miles beyond the city, to a neglected, crumbling temple called Taposiris Magna. It sat abandoned, half buried, written off as insignificant. But to Martinez, it fit the profile perfectly. Remote, sacred, close to the sea, and tied directly to the cult of Isis, the goddess Cleopatra claimed to embody. Then in 2022, the ground beneath that forgotten temple answered back. Martinez's team broke through the limestone and uncovered something that shouldn't exist at all. A tunnel carved straight through solid bedrock, nearly a mile long, 6 feet high, flooded with mud and seawater, perfectly aligned, perfectly intentional. Architects who examined it were stunned. This wasn't a random passage. It mirrored the design of legendary ancient Greek engineering feats, structures once considered almost mythical, and it led straight toward the Mediterranean. You don't build something like this for a minor site. You build it to protect something priceless. And the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a temple, it was a gateway, and what they would find next would completely change how we understand Cleopatra's final plan. At first glance, Taposiris Magna looks like a dead end. Wind-beaten stone, cracked columns, a forgotten temple sitting far from the power centers of ancient Egypt. But once the tunnel was uncovered, everything changed, because tunnels don't exist in isolation. Off the coast nearby, underwater surveys revealed the remains of a sunken port, massive stone blocks, harbor structures now buried beneath the sea. This place wasn't remote at all. It was connected. Ships once docked here. People arrived and departed quietly, far from the eyes of Alexandria or Rome. And that detail matters. Kathleen Martinez believes Cleopatra wasn't running from from death. She was running from Rome, from the public spectacle that awaited defeated rulers. She didn't want a tomb meant to be visited. She wanted one meant to vanish. But she also wanted something else. Cleopatra didn't just see herself as a queen. She presented herself as the living embodiment of Isis, the goddess of rebirth and divine authority. And Isis wasn't buried in just any place. She was laid to rest in sacred ground, surrounded by ritual, protected by silence. Inside the temple complex, Martinez's team made another discovery that sent chills through the excavation. Hidden within 16 rock-cut tombs were mummies. But these weren't typical burials. When archaeologists examined the skulls, they noticed something glittering inside the mouths of the dead. Gold. Thin sheets of gold foil shaped like tongues, placed where the real tongue once was. In ancient Egyptian belief, the afterlife wasn't automatic. You had to speak. You had to plead your case before Osiris, the lord of the underworld. A golden tongue granted golden eloquence, the power to address a god. But here's the unsettling question. Why were these people buried here? This wasn't a common practice. These weren't random nobles or priests. Martinez believes they were courtiers, loyal members of Cleopatra's inner circle, people who served her in life and were prepared to serve her in death. Think about what that implies. These tombs weren't a cemetery. They were a waiting room, a royal reception hall for the afterlife. If her closest followers were buried here, equipped to announce her arrival to the gods, then the most important figure was still missing, the queen herself. And if this was truly her necropolis, then the tunnel wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was an entrance. And while archaeologists haven't yet reached the end of that passage, we don't need to wait for it to learn something disturbing about Cleopatra, because one of the darkest clues to her biology has already been unearthed far away from Egypt. To understand the people buried at Toposiris Magna, you have to understand the woman they served, and to understand her, you have to look at the first body Cleopatra ever put in the ground, her sister. History loves to paint Cleopatra as a seductress, but the truth is far colder. She grew up inside a dynasty where survival depended on elimination. Brothers married sisters, sisters removed sisters, and the most dangerous enemy was often the one who shared your blood. That enemy was Arsinoe IV. When Cleopatra was driven into exile, it wasn't Rome that took her throne. It was Arsinoe, younger, ambitious, and fiercely intelligent. She stepped into power while Cleopatra was gone, and when Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, it wasn't Cleopatra who resisted him at first. It was Arsinoe. She didn't hide behind walls. She led armies. She organized a rebellion strong enough to trap Caesar inside the royal palace itself. For a moment, she nearly rewrote history. But history doesn't remember almost. Arsinoe was captured, shipped to Rome, and forced to march through the streets in chains. The crowds didn't cheer. They cried. A teenage girl humiliated in public was too much, even for Rome. That sympathy spared her life. Instead of execution, she was exiled to the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, one of the most sacred places in the ancient world. She thought she was safe. She wasn't. In 41 BCE, Cleopatra made a request that stunned even hardened Roman politicians. Mark Antony sent men to the temple steps. They dragged Arsinoe out of holy ground and ended her life in public view. It was a violation of sacred law, a message written in blood. For Cleopatra, it solved a problem. For modern historians, it created a map. We knew where Arsinoe died, and centuries later, archaeologists found something nearby, a strange tomb known as the Octagon. Inside was a skeleton, young, royal, buried with honors far beyond what a normal person would receive. The theory was irresistible. This had to be Arsinoe IV. If it was, then the implications were massive, because Arsinoe was Cleopatra's full sister. Same parents, same blood, same genetic code. If we could read Arsinoe's bones, we could finally see Cleopatra's face, her ancestry, her health, her biological reality. For years, scholars treated that skeleton like a mirror, but mirrors only work if they're real. And when modern science finally took a closer look, the reflection shattered. For decades, the skeleton inside the octagon in Ephesus was treated like a solved case. Scholars measured the bones, they reconstructed a face, they debated skin tone, ancestry, and royal lineage. Entire documentaries were built on the assumption that this was Arsinoe IV. But science doesn't care about assumptions. In 2022, a team from the University of Vienna reopened the case, not with theories, but with technology that didn't exist when the skeleton was first studied. The long-lost skull was located in the university archives, mislabeled and forgotten for years. And this time, they didn't just look at it, they looked inside it. Using high-resolution micro-CT scans, researchers created a digital map of the skull down to fractions of a millimeter. Then they targeted the densest bone in the human body, the petrous temporal bone. It's nature's vault. Even when everything else decays, this bone can still preserve DNA. When the results came back in early 2025, they didn't just challenge the theory, they destroyed it. The skeleton was not Arsinoe IV. It wasn't even female. The DNA DNA revealed the presence of a Y chromosome. The body belonged to an adolescent boy somewhere between 11 and 14 years old, and he wasn't healthy. The scans showed severe developmental disorders, a stunted jaw, asymmetrical cranial growth, bone structures consistent with conditions like Treacher-Collins syndrome or advanced rickets. This wasn't a rival queen. This was a suffering child. And then came the detail no one expected. His genetic markers didn't trace back to Egypt. They pointed toward Italy or Sardinia, a foreign origin, completely disconnected from the Ptolemaic bloodline everyone thought they were studying. Suddenly, one of the most famous skeletons in ancient history became a question mark. Why was this deformed Roman or Italian boy buried in a monumental tomb in one of the most prestigious sacred sites of the ancient world? The octagon wasn't a normal grave. It was a hieron, a tomb reserved for heroes, semi-divine figures, or individuals of extreme symbolic importance. So who was he? A hidden royal child? A political scapegoat? A ritual offering meant to erase a secret too dangerous to survive? Whatever the truth is, one thing became painfully clear. The idea that this skeleton proved Cleopatra's ancestry was an illusion, a product of outdated science and wishful thinking, which meant we were back where we started. If this boy wasn't her sister, then Cleopatra's true biology was still hidden, and to find it, we had to stop chasing bones and start following bloodlines, because the real horror wasn't buried in Ephesus, it was growing inside Cleopatra's own.
To understand Cleopatra's biology, you don't need a body, you need a family tree. And Cleopatra's family tree didn't branch outward like a normal one. It folded in on itself. The Ptolemaic dynasty was Greek, not Egyptian. They ruled Egypt as outsiders and clung to power through a single obsession: blood purity. To protect their throne, they adopted a practice most cultures abandoned long before: close kin marriage. Not cousins, not distant relatives, siblings. Historians believe Cleopatra's parents, Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra V, were likely full brother and sister. And it didn't stop there. Her grandparents may have been uncle and niece, possibly even siblings again. Generation after generation, the same genes were recycled, stacked, and repeated. Geneticists call this pedigree collapse. In a normal family tree, your ancestors double with each generation: 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. Cleopatra's lineage didn't expand, it shrank. The same ancestors appeared over and over again, amplifying every hidden flaw. Modern estimates suggest Cleopatra's coefficient of inbreeding exceeded 45%. To put that in perspective, the child of first cousins carries about 6%. Even the famously deformed Habsburg dynasty of Spain, known for producing sick and unstable rulers, peaked around 25%. Cleopatra's number was nearly double. And history gives us a warning sign of what that level of inbreeding does. Consider Charles II of Spain, the final Habsburg king. He couldn't speak properly until age 4. He couldn't walk until 8. His jaw was so malformed that his teeth never met. He swallowed food whole because he couldn't chew. When he died at 38, doctors recorded a body filled with fluid, a heart the size of a peppercorn, and organs that barely functioned. That was at 25%. Cleopatra was born into something far worse. Biologically, she should have been fragile, deformed, cognitively impaired, the kind of ruler who never makes it past childhood. And yet, history describes the opposite. She spoke 9 languages. She debated philosophers. She outmaneuvered Roman generals. She ruled one of the richest kingdoms on earth while surrounded by enemies. That contradiction is terrifying, because when genetics say someone shouldn't survive, but history says they thrived, there are only 2 explanations. Either Cleopatra was a once-in-a-million genetic anomaly, or she was fighting something we've never fully recognized. And the first clue to that fight isn't found in her own body. It's found in what her relatives became when the genetic curse didn't spare them. If Cleopatra truly inherited the full weight of her dynasty's genetic collapse, then brilliance alone wouldn't have saved her. Survival would have required intervention, and Cleopatra had access to something no other ruler in the ancient world possessed: medicine. Alexandria wasn't just a political capital, it was the scientific nerve center of the ancient world. Its libraries held medical texts from Egypt, Greece, Persia, and beyond. And Cleopatra didn't just rule from there, she studied there. Ancient sources describe her as deeply involved in chemistry, pharmacology, and cosmetics. She wasn't a passive consumer of remedies. She experimented, she tested, she recorded results. Later physicians like Galen even quoted fragments of her medical writings. This wasn't vanity, it was self-preservation. If Cleopatra suffered from chronic joint pain and skeletal weakness common in heavily inbred dynasties, she had access to opium harvested from Egyptian poppies. This wasn't recreational, it was the ancient world's most effective painkiller, reserved for royalty and high priests. If her body was trapped in cycles of exhaustion and insomnia, she may have turned to kefi, a complex incense burned in temples at night. Plutarch wrote that its scent calmed the nerves, eased anxiety, and softened the edge of mental strain. For someone living with constant internal overstimulation, it
It wasn't perfume, it was treat. Then there was the blue lotus. Often steeped in wine, this flower produced mild euphoria and a floating sensation. Modern studies suggest it affected dopamine pathways. It didn't dull the mind, it sharpened mood and confidence. Cleopatra's legendary charisma may not have been mystical at all. It may have been chemically assisted. And then there's cosmetics. Cleopatra famously wrote a book called Cosmeticon. It wasn't a beauty guide, it was a technical manual, recipes, measurements, formulas. If her family line carried metabolic disorders like Graves' disease, cosmetics weren't decoration, they were camouflage. Dark coal could reshape bulging eyes. Wide collars and layered jewelry could hide a swollen neck. Oils and powders could mask skin issues caused by hormonal imbalance. She wasn't hiding flaws for vanity, she was engineering an illusion. Cleopatra may have been the world's first true biohacker, a ruler quietly managing her own failing biology while projecting the image of divine perfection. Every public appearance was a performance, backed by chemistry, botany, and relentless control. But here's the chilling part. If Cleopatra needed medicine just to function, then the stories of her boundless energy and sleepless ambition might not be signs of strength, they might have been symptoms. And to understand that, we have to look at the relatives who didn't escape the curse. To see what Cleopatra may have been fighting, you only need to look at the ones who came before her. Take her great-grand-uncle, Ptolemy VIII. History didn't bother hiding what he became. Ancient writers nicknamed him Viscount, meaning potbelly. But that label barely scratches the surface. Descriptions paint a far more disturbing picture. He was massively obese, yet physically weak. His limbs struggled to support his own weight. He had to be escorted when he walked. But the most telling details weren't his size. They were his features. Bulging eyes, a swollen neck, labored breathing. Modern medical historians see something familiar in those descriptions. Graves' disease. It's an autoimmune disorder that attacks the thyroid, flooding the body with hormones. It changes how you look, but more importantly, it changes how you behave. Symptoms include extreme restlessness, rapid speech, insomnia, impulsive decisions, and bursts of manic energy, followed by crashes. Now think about how Cleopatra is described. Relentless stamina, sleepless nights, rapid-fire conversations in multiple languages, high-risk political gambles that bordered on reckless. For centuries, we've called this genius. But what if it was chemistry? If Graves' disease ran through the Ptolemaic bloodline, Cleopatra may have inherited the same biological storm. A body permanently stuck in overdrive, a mind racing faster than it could rest, energy that looked like brilliance but came at a cost. This reframes everything. Her charisma may have been fueled by adrenaline she couldn't shut off. Her ambition may have been intensified by hormonal imbalance. Even her legendary mood swings, praised as passion or ambition, might have been medical. And unlike her uncle, Cleopatra learned how to manage it. She controlled the symptoms with medicine. She masked the physical signs with cosmetics. She weaponized the energy instead of letting it destroy her. She didn't escape the family curse. She adapted to it, which means the Cleopatra we admire wasn't just battling Rome or rival siblings. She was battling her own biology every single day. And that brings us back to the place where all of this converges. Because if Kathleen Martinez eventually reaches the end of that tunnel beneath Taposiris Magna, what she uncovers won't just answer historical questions. It will expose the physical truth of the most famous woman in ancient. After everything we know now, the search beneath Taposiris Magna feels different. Kathleen Martinez isn't just digging for a queen anymore. She's digging for proof. Proof of what Cleopatra really was beneath the myth, beneath the cosmetics, beneath the carefully engineered image of divine perfection. That tunnel stretching through solid bedrock is no longer just an architectural mystery. It's a final barrier between legend and biology, nearly a mile long, submerged, silent, leading away from the world she lost and toward the sea she may have used to vanish forever. If Martinez breaks through that final wall, she won't just uncover a sarcophagus, she'll uncover a medical record. Bones don't lie. They preserve stress, disease, trauma, and survival. They carry the fingerprints of genetics no propaganda can erase. Cleopatra's remains could reveal signs of chronic illness, metabolic disorder, or skeletal strain hidden beneath decades of royal pageantry. And that discovery would force a reckoning, because we've spent centuries worshipping a fantasy, a Hollywood queen, a flawless seductress. But the woman who ruled Egypt at its breaking point may have been something far more impressive. A strategist who eliminated siblings to survive, a ruler who used chemistry as a weapon, a survivor who turned genetic weakness into political strength. If the tomb confirms this, history won't be rewritten as a tragedy, it will be rewritten as endurance. And that's what makes the silence underground so unsettling. Every day that tunnel remains sealed, the gap between myth and truth narrows. Technology advances, ground-penetrating radar sharpens, DNA sequencing becomes more precise. Cleopatra's secret isn't disappearing. It's waiting. And when it's finally exposed, we won't just be looking at the face of a queen. We'll be looking at the cost of absolute power and the human body that carried it.
So what happens if the impossible finally happens? What if tomorrow that tunnel beneath Topolcites Magna is fully cleared? What if archaeologists step into a sealed chamber untouched for over 2,000 years? And what if lying inside is Cleopatra herself? Because after everything we've uncovered, we need to prepare for a truth that doesn't match the legend. She may not resemble the marble statues or the silver screen fantasies. She may not look like the woman history decided to worship. Instead, we may find a ruler who was smaller, more fragile, marked by stress and disease. A woman whose body tells a story of constant struggle beneath layers of calculated control. And that wouldn't diminish her. It would elevate her. Because ruling Rome's shadow while fighting a collapsing dynasty, internal betrayal, and a hostile empire is impressive enough. Doing it while managing a genetic curse passed down through generations is something else entirely. Cleopatra didn't just outsmart Rome, she outlasted her bloodline. She ruled at the end of a dynasty that had been eating itself alive for centuries. She watched siblings fall, parents weaken, and ancestors rot under the weight of their own DNA. And instead of breaking, she adapted. She learned. She engineered survival where nature offered none. That's the version of Cleopatra history isn't ready for. Not the flawless goddess, not the irresistible seductress, but the ruthless political survivor, the strategist who turned science into armor, the last pharaoh who refused to let biology decide her fate. And that's why this discovery matters so much, because when that tomb is finally opened, we won't just be correcting portraits or rewriting biographies. We'll be confronting a raw truth about power, survival, and what it costs to rule at the edge of extinction. So if the tomb reveals a woman shaped by struggle instead.
For over 2,000 years, Cleopatra has haunted our imagination, a queen of unmatched beauty, a goddess incarnate, a woman who bent Rome to her will. But what we've uncovered tells a very different story. She wasn't simply a seductress, she was a survivor, a strategist who navigated political assassinations, family betrayals, and an empire determined to erase her. A woman who may have faced a genetic lottery stacked against her from birth, yet still mastered language, science, and diplomacy to rule one of the most powerful kingdoms of the ancient world. Kathleen Martinez's tunnel beneath Topolcites Magna is more than a dig site. It's a gateway to understanding the truth. When that tomb is finally breached, it won't just reveal a body. It could reveal the reality of Cleopatra's life, the illnesses she battled, the genetic legacy she inherited, and the clever, calculated ways she turned vulnerability into power. History has long painted her in silver screen light, but science is revealing the shadows behind the myth. Cleopatra may have looked nothing like the images we've cherished. She may have struggled with pain and disorder, yet she transformed that struggle into a reign that has echoed for millennia. So what will we see when the final door is opened? A goddess? A survivor? Or something far more human and far more extraordinary? The truth of Cleopatra is still buried, and it is waiting for those who dare to uncover it. If you think you know the queen, think again. Share your theory below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysteries unearthed from the shadows of history.